Welcome to the lesson. We're going to be studying music theory, but only the applicable music theory. That's why I call it music theory is only a theory. We're going to be talking about the circle of fifths today, a big part of music theory, but only with 5 chords. C, up 5 to G, up 5 to D, up 5 to A, and finally up 5 to E. And you probably recognize this chord progression as Hey Joe by Jimi Hendrix. It's also in the middle of A Day in the Life by the Beatles. Right? Then Hey Joe. Hey Joe. So that relationship, 1 to 5, the 5 becomes the 1, goes to 5, is how the guitar player understands his chords, his or her chords, because ultimately if you're playing open chords, C to G to D to A to E, every one of those chords can be played as an open chord. But if you look at their relative minors, C, A minor, then you realize that not all the relative minors can be played as open chords. The chord we're going to work on today is G. And since it's a key that we're going to work on as well, we'll be dealing with E minor as relative minor. Chord number 4 will be C, and chord number 5 will be D. And basically I just played Perfect by Ed Sheeran without the capo in the first fret. So those are 4 of the 7 chords, but if you're going to play the entire chord scale, you sort of need to remember what the C chord scale was. C, major, D minor, E minor. So 2 and 3 are both minor. F, G, 4 and 5 were both major. A minor, 6 is minor, and 7 was flatted. We played B flat instead of B. Well, the G chord scale works no differently, except that in the key of G, we have 1 sharp. All Fs are sharp in the key of G. And you'll notice some of the chords have that, but you'll also notice that the 7th chord naturals the F, as we tend to flat the 7th. When you flat a sharp, it becomes a natural. It's the truth. Anyway, the chords are G, number 1. Now, after G is not H, right? It's A. So A minor, once again, 2 is minor, number 2. 3 minor is B minor, and you can't play it as an open chord here, or even here, but to get the full sound, a barred B minor is a good way to go. But open's fine, as long as you're only playing the four strings that are involved in the chord, that are being fretted. C is number 4, D is number 5, talked about that before. E minor, number 6, the relative. And number 7, because it's a flatted, F, which you could play here, but you have to play it as a bar, no matter what. So there you go, the beginning of the bar chords. And they are important. But when it comes to making these chord scales, open chords work really well in these 2 keys, the key of C and the key of G. So let's reminisce and review. Key of C, D minor is number 2, E minor is number 3, F number 4, G number 5, A minor number 6, B flat, the flatted 7th. Back to C. Same thing applies to G. G, A minor number 2, B minor number 3, C 4, D is 5, E minor is 6, and the flatted 7th, F. You could really hear the flatted 7th being used in the key of G in the song Hard Day's Night by the Beatles. It's been a hard day's night. That's just C, G, C, G, 1, 4, 1. But then he goes, and I've been working like a dog. That's the flatted 7th. So it really does have a place in most songs, that flatted 7th chord. And in the key of G, it's probably the easiest to remember because all these chords are so common. But F is the first bar chord in the beginning of Trouble. which is why in the future we're going to be dealing with open chords for the chord scales so that we can leave some of the strings open and have the chords climb in two configurations, either minor or major. And those will be the D chord scale, the A chord scale, and the E chord scale. So we'll be dealing with those leaving open strings because there is a D string and there is an A string and there is an E string. The reason we don't do it with the G string is because we only have 3 notes to work with, including the G string, which means we don't really make a chord if we omit it. So as a result, the G chords are open. G, A minor, B minor, C, D, E minor, F, and back to G. And that's what we're going to be working on this week. Next up, bass. So on the bass, as you know, we're not dealing with chords, we're dealing with single notes, but the scales are still there. For instance, the G chord scale that you just played, on the bass would be played G, A, B, notice the stretch pinky, C, D, E, notice it again, and then F, G. And that's not a major scale, that's the Mixolydian scale in the key of C, starting on the 5th note of the C scale, G. But it is a usable scale for the bass because of that F. It's that funky F, right? That flatted 7th. Now, the traditional major scale is pointer, ring, stretch pinky, pointer, ring, stretch pinky, middle, ring. As long as you use that fingering, you can play a major scale from any fret you want. It'll always be right, like E flat. There it is, E flat major scale. Simple as that. As long as you know the first note, the fingering will get you to the rest. And don't forget our pentatonics. In G, you can slide with the ring, hammer with the pointer. Once again, G, slide with the ring, hammer with the pointer. Once again, G, pinky. So I would suggest practicing your pentatonic scale on the bass. But it's also important to note that there's a relative minor to G major, E minor. And the way it works with pentatonics is that if you start with your ring finger on the minor, then the pointer finger goes up in the same way it did with the major. G major, that is. Another way to do that is start with the open E and then do G major. But remember, if you start with E, you must end on it. The nature of scales, beginning note, same as end note, with an octave difference. Okay, so I would suggest that you learn that E minor scale. Remember with C major, which we noticed sounded a bit like My Girl, we also have A minor. So notice how the ring finger went down. Well, the same thing happens with E. Here's G, and here's the E. So the relative minor starts with the ring finger, and the major starts with the pointer finger when you're playing pentatonics. Try to keep that in mind, because if you do the fingering right, you'll always get the right notes. Slide, hammer, pointer. Open, same notes, hammer, done. End with E. Okay. All right, and so the main thing that we're dealing with in the bass is the pentatonic and the scale, but we also have a circle of fifths, which is easy to find on the bass, because when you go up 5 on the bass, you go down to the same fret of the previous string on them. So that's C to G, that's D to A, and then E's here as well as here. So it's a really cool progression for the bass. Hey Joe, where you going, right? They also do a that's using chromatic notes as the bass line. Now the guitar plays that on the record, so we'll be going over that a little bit. It's not about learning songs, as you know, it's about learning the basics of music theory that applies to songs. So you can sort of ear it out when you're listening to a song as far as what chord might be next. And go online and find the tablature or the chord diagrams and you'll confirm your suspicions. The idea is to get you to ear train. If you're used to hearing certain progressions, you can hear it. And as a result, you know what it is just as soon as you hear it. You don't have to be told. Eventually. It took me a while, believe me. That's why we started with 2 chords. Now we're working our way to 7. Okay, so as a review, pentatonic scale. Minor version. Circle of fifths. And that should do you for the bass. Next up, piano. Our logo, which tells us we're in the middle of the piano. This is middle C, so if I were playing a C chord, I'd play it here. I could also play an octave version of that C chord. Same notes, just the added octave, which is then easy to see the chord scale as you move up. It's all white keys except for the B flat, the flatted 7th, and back to the C. Well, it's no different for G, other than G has an F sharp, so some of the chords will have F sharps in them. There's the G chord. Once again, it can be played here, but this is the octave version. A minor, B minor, C, D major, E minor, and then the 7th that's flatted, F major. Back to G. And so songs that would use the F, I mentioned Hard Day's Night earlier. That particular progression is the 1 to the 4 to the 7, in this case the flatted 7th, back to the 4. So that's a huge progression, very popular progression. There's another version of the same thing. And of course, is 1, 4, 5. But is either 5, 4, 1 or potentially 1, flatted 7, 4. Whatever the case may be, the math part isn't important. What's important is that you realize if you're in the key of G, you might be playing an F chord in that key. In the same way, if you're in the key of C, you might be playing a B flat. A good example of that is Freebird. Freebird starts with G, then it goes to D, then E minor, all chords from the chord scale. Then it goes F to C to D. So that's a perfect example of using the chord scale. Whatever the case may be, work on the G chord scale this week, because next week we'll be doing the D chord scale, which has 2 sharps. F's and C's will be sharps. As we move our way up the circle of fifths, we'll find lots of sharps. But on the 7th chord, we'll be flatting that. When you flat a C sharp, it's a C natural, and that's the chord that hits before D. That's next time. In the meantime, work on your G chord scale. And don't forget your pentatonic. Not to mention your major scale. My favorite, though, is the vocal exercise. The first 5 notes of the major scale. La, 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 la. So do that when you want to warm up your vocal as well. In the meantime, key of G. I'll see you next time.